In the spirit of M. Night Shymalan, we've got a twist of our own. A superhero film that isn't devoid of value, Glass.
The three of you think you are superheroes. Like something out of a comic book.
No way.
You are mistaken.
And yet, it is true. May I meet the beast?
I hope for your sake that he likes you.
A lot of people are going to die.
Don't do this.
What have you done?
Rated PG-13.
This is the Superhero Pantheon. On this podcast, we take one superhero film a week and decide whether it should be in the Pantheon, the pile of shame, or somewhere in between. My name is Jerome Cuson. You can find me on Twitter at JeromeC1985. You can find additional episodes of this podcast through Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and all of your favorite podcast apps. Through the real world, we strongly encourage you to leave a 4 or 5 star review, so as to help people discover this show and the great work that the folks at The Real World are doing. If you would like to interact with us or send feedback, you could do so in 2 ways. First, send an email to superheropantheon@gmail.com. Second, find us on Twitter at HeroPantheon. My co-host for this week and every week will be Brian DeBrain. He can be found on Twitter at Brian DeBrain. And Brian, we have gotten through the bottom of the Marvel barrel, and now we are going back into 2019 to discuss all the superhero movies. There are 6 to discuss. We have 7 to discuss. We will be discussing 4 of them this month of April. By this week, discussing Glass. Next week, Shazam. Then 2 weeks, what a doubleheader of both Hellboy and Dark Phoenix. Then May, we are going to do something a little bit different. And then June, if you can believe it, Brian, June, our final month doing this podcast, as we will be ending things with a bang. Captain Marvel, Spider-Man Far From Home, and Avengers Endgame will be our Volume 2 finale. I think that's a pretty fitting way to go out. So that's what we've got to look forward to, but we are going to first talk about Glass, a movie that has a 37% on Rotten Tomatoes. And if you read some of the reviews, you would think that this is a borderline pile of shame-worthy movie, Brian. But the one thing I will say is that I think you and we actually both agree on this movie, and we don't think that it is as bad as the Rotten Tomatoes scores would have you believe.
Well, for me, totally opposite, because I found myself loving this movie even more. This would be the 3rd time I've watched this movie in the last, year and 3 months or whatever. I saw it twice in theaters before I had the AMC Movie Pass, meaning I had to pay for it twice. So what does that tell you? Am I crazy? Maybe. Do I have a love for M. Night Shyamalan movies? Maybe. But then again, I hate the second half of The Village, so what does that tell you? I don't know, but I have a really strong love and appreciation for the connectivity and the full circleness of Glass, Split, and of course, Unbreakable, just all that coming together, and all the references to both, and the way that I was able to notice even some deeper things, like the themes going back and forth, the way they would play the theme from Unbreakable, and the theme from Split, and merge it into this one kind of narrative, and you can go back and forth because the strings are kind of similar. So, and then I love the mood of the movie too. I don't know what it is. It's dark and gloomy, but it's that kind of M. Night Shyamalan weird kind of world that kind of sucks you in. The kind of world that kind of sucks you in when you watch The Sixth Sense. So, I almost wanted that Sixth Sense cameo that not a lot of people wanted, fucking if Haley Joel Osment popped out at the end or something like that. That would have been even crazier, but I think that would have been a little bit too distracting. But the message of this movie to me is clear. It's like it's an anti-superhero movie in a way, and I've kind of accepted that because it really subverts your expectations. It sets up this big thing at the end that doesn't even happen. So, in a way, I dig it, man. Especially, for the budget and what you expect, going into this movie, knowing the budget, I kind of expected a movie like this, but I think a lot of people expected something different, more, what we're akin to in these superhero movies nowadays with these big budget stuff and the big explosions and everything like that. I don't even think there was a single explosion in this movie for an action superhero movie, so what does that tell you?
It's almost bizarre that there are no explosions, and I appreciate what you said. I also like this movie. I don't think I enjoy it as much as you do. I think I am probably somewhere in between that 37% and where you're at. I still think that this movie does have some flaws to it. But the thing that I appreciated is the fact that even though the budget for this movie was not tremendously high, they were still able to get a lot of positive things. I think when we talk about the third act, I think that specifically is the place that they needed a bigger budget. But if you kind of look at the first half, the first 90 minutes of this movie, I think it's generally well executed. I think the performances in this movie are very good, almost across the board. I think the one person that I do continue to have problems with is Bruce Willis. I don't think he's very good in this movie, but I think everybody else kind of is. I think everybody either delivers or in some cases over-delivers based on the material. So, of course, this is a sequel to Unbreakable, as was the movie Split. Disney technically does own the rights to Unbreakable. Director M. Night Shymalan retained the rights to any potential sequels, so the studio could not make one without his involvement. Such was his desire for creative control that he co-financed Glass by mortgaging his house. If you can believe that, he mortgaged his house, and I am sure that that is one of the reasons the budget was relatively low. But because he did a lot of the financing himself, he was also thus able to keep a lot of the money. So the windfall for him, because this movie cost so little, that just in the first weekend, I think the budget for this movie was $20 million. It made $40 million the first weekend. That basically means that he made his money back the first weekend, and this movie did go on to be very successful, despite some of the critical response. Now, of course, it's not as successful as some of the Marvel and DC movies, but given the context, this movie was very financially successful, and I think it continued kind of the M. Night Shyamalan comeback.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of like paying attention to, was the budget of this movie and how smart it was. And look, sometimes you got to gamble on yourself, and I think he did the math in his head, like thinking like, okay, Blumhouse has this, we talked about it before, this Blumhouse machine where they take a $5 million to $10 million production on a horror movie, flip it, make a big profit, despite what the critics think about it, and they'll make a good profit on like a $40 million total haul for like a mediocre kind of horror movie. So with that kind of math involved, and you're betting on yourself, and you have this fan base, and you look at the numbers that Split made about 2 years prior, I think it made sense. And especially like he did it at the right time, especially with the economy in the shitter right now. Like he banked on himself at the right time to mortgage his house and get that money, and he did the right thing. I think sometimes you just got to gamble on yourself, man, and he paid off. And it was worth it, I think, because I think he did it for the fans. You know what I mean? Because I feel like there was that fan base that kind of built up over the last 15 years through Unbreakable, and then the surprise connection to Split. I think that kind of just created this interest, and he knew that there was enough interest to get the money back, and he was right. And then that first weekend was true, and then despite the critics and all that kind of thing, like he still made a hell of a lot of money in his own pocket.
I think the wild thing to me is that it took 20 years for this to develop, and it basically took a secret sequel. That Split was portrayed as this horror movie, and the big twist is that in fact this was a secret sequel to Unbreakable all along. And I think that's something that is unprecedented. It's probably not something that you're ever going to see again, even though it's something that studios might want to consider as they move forward. But I think so much of what makes this film unique is just the way that everything is within the camera. There's not a lot of CGI. You know that some parts of James McAvoy's body have been enhanced with computer graphics, but for the most part, I mean, a lot of the things that you are seeing is within the camera. So I think one of the cool things about this movie is we talk a lot about Marvel movies and how ugly they can look. In this movie, colors are so crucially important. You have green for David Dunn. You have kind of a yellowish color for the Beast. And you also, of course, have purple for Mr. Glass. And there are various reasons that these colors are associated with these different characters. That David Dunn is associated with life-giving, so hence him wearing green. The Beast is associated with religious ceremonies, looking like a monk. The Beast also kind of, again, a lot of religious connotations. And Mr. Glass wearing purple because he is important, a main character of the comics. And he even says it himself, this is not the crossover, but this is in fact the origin story. And I think some of the exposition can get a little cheesy at times, and I feel like there's a lot more telling and not showing. But I think in that particular instance, I think that was definitely one of the more creative lines in the movie.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the poster, I love the poster because it reflects those colors and the way that the poster was put together, and then especially the one where they're reflecting on the ground, on the floor in the asylum room. I thought that was just well put together, and you see the colors, and then it reflects it in the movie. And I really love the way that he put the look of this movie together. He kind of based it off of the way the camera moved Unbreakable, and he combined that with the way that he built the suspense and the weird kind of, the way he shot the Beast in Split. He just combined that, and then adding it with the colors, and then just emphasizing Mr. Glass even more so. Like it just seemed like he knew what he was doing, and he definitely had this like palette in mind, and you can see it reflected on the screen, and he definitely knew how to approach this movie. And then what really helped too, I think, is there's this Alex Ross. Alex Ross is one of these great all-time comic book illustrators. He's famous for Kingdom Come, which I love. He did this poster that looks amazing, and that's the alternate poster that's been going around. That's got that hyper photorealistic look to it. That's his style. And even then, like I felt like the production or the marketing really got it down. Like it felt like a superhero movie, but it also felt like a drama, and that's what essentially that was Unbreakable. It's pretty much a superhero drama origin story, and it still had the same tone, and I dug it, man. And I just love the way it looked, and the way that the marketing got it right. So for a limited budget, I thought they did great. So good for him on that.
Yeah, I think that for the most part, I think again it is mostly effective, and of course because this is an M Night Shyamalan movie, of course there has to be a twist involved, and of course the big twist is that Elijah was also responsible for the death of Kevin's father, an event that ultimately forced Kevin to stay with his abused mother, and this situation caused him to form these multiple personalities, and this is something that harkens back to Unbreakable, where we are, of course, the big train accident, which is one of the most important parts of that movie. And I think this is something that we all could have kind of seen coming. I think this was almost something that was it was almost too predictable in some cases, but it certainly does give a reason for Kevin to exist and for Kevin to be very bitter at Glass as well. There's one more note that I want to get to before we get into the categories, and that is that Sarah Paulson, who is very famous for her roles on a number of Ryan Murphy shows, she accepted this part without actually reading the script, even though her role was originally intended for a man, because she really wanted to work with director M. Night Shyamalan. So I think that's a hugely positive thing, and I'm a bit mixed on the role itself, but Sarah Paulson is very, very good in this movie.
Yeah, it almost seems like they were going for that One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest kind of feel to it. And now that you mentioned that it was really originally written for a man, I can kind of see that. But either way, it would have been just as effective if you got another great actor in that role. Very kind of open kind of role, but effective nonetheless. And Sarah Paulson, she kind of could, she had me almost convinced halfway through the movie. So she did a great job. Like the whole gaslighting thing, we'll get to that later on in a second, the story part. But yeah, she pretty much had me almost convinced. So she did a great job in that. And plus, she was doing some great TV stuff and the O.J. Simpson thing and American Horror Story, I believe. So she's doing great on the TV end. So I thought this was a great transition for her. Wasn't too big of a big movie role, but I think the right kind of role for her, kind of mid-sized kind of role if you want to kind of call it that. So and I thought she did a great job. So
All right, let's get to the categories. When we start this movie, we see a lot of the focus being on David Dunn, as played by Bruce Willis. He is fighting crime with the help of his son, Joseph, and he's still being pursued by the police. Brian, it still freaks me out just how much Spencer Treat Clark, who plays Joseph Dunn, looks like Jeff Anderson, right? It freaks you out too, I hope.
not too bad. If you wore a hat half the movie or most of the movie, then I'd say yes, because I'm just used to Jeff Anderson with a hat on. But I get what you're saying. It's the same facial features and all that kind of thing. But yeah, I was more kind of thinking that he's just, he's his Robin, man, and that's the way I saw him, a Robin slash, um, what's his name, Ned, I guess, from Spider-Man, that kind of role. So that's the way I see him, and I thought him having that connection with his dad. I thought that was really cool because, like, especially getting the same actor all these years later, that same connectivity, man, it adds something to it. If you had a different actor in that role playing the son, it wouldn't feel the same. But the fact that they got the same actor, cut with the same old footage going back and forth, it just made it really effective for me.
I love the fact that they did have the same actor, and the fact that he's really good in the role too. I think it works out really well. I love the fact that they bring back Spencer Tree Clark, they bring back Charlene Woodard who played Elijah's mother, and they bring back Anna Taylor Joy. I think it really creates some great connective tissue, and it's really great to see them. And I think all three of them, even though they're in more supporting roles, I think they're very good. And I also appreciate the fact that he and his son do have that good relationship, even though we don't see any of Robin Wright as Audrey Dunn. We do get to see that father son relationship, and I think those are probably my favorite Bruce Willis scenes because I don't know about you, Brian, but whatever Bruce Willis had, he doesn't have it anymore. And it's really depressing and it's really sad because there are times that I think Bruce has been very good in a lot of movies, a lot of action movies, going back to Die Hard. But man, I mean, there's just. I got nothing from his performance in this movie. I think he is easily the weakest part of this category. And I think it's both from a character standpoint and the way that he ultimately kind of dies, I think is probably the worst aspect of this movie. But for me, Bruce Willis is by far the weakest part. And, I'm going to have some positive things to say about the other two major performers and even the supporting cast. But for me, Bruce Willis just does not work in this movie. There's. And I know that he's toning down kind of the smart ass charismatic parts, but even when you watch Unbreakable, there's still something there, and he just seems old and tired. And again, I know that that's kind of the point of the movie, but I mean, he's acting like he's old and tired, but he's just old and tired.
I get you. I don't know, man. It just seems like the same old Bruce Willis to me, but I just felt like the first third, or maybe the first 20 minutes of the movie, was just focused on getting him back in your psyche and just reconnecting with that character. Because I felt like at this point we know everything about him already. You know what I mean? So I was more interested in like figuring out what's going on with the Beast and what's catching up with Elijah. So for me, it was like, okay, what more can you tell right now? You know what I mean? We know the wife died, and then I love the little subtle thing. I don't know if you noticed, but like when he's putting the suit back on at the end of the movie, he has his wife's the wedding ring that he initially took off in the beginning of Unbreakable, and now he has it on a chain around his heart, next to his heart all the time because she passed away, obviously. But yeah, I mean, they could have maybe talked more about that, but I felt like, what more can he talk about? He's on this journey of, he doesn't stop. He's not. I mean, it's clearly he's not wanting to stop because at the beginning of the movie as well, he's talking with his son. His son's asking him, "You should take a break." You know, you've done a lot already. The cops are after you, like pretty hot after you, and he still didn't want to take a break. So that's kind of on him. But I mean, yeah, I get what you're saying, but I just felt like that's kind of what the role kind of needed. You know what I mean? But again, he wasn't supposed to be the total focus, obviously, because also, like I said, like what much can you tell? I mean, he had a whole movie based on him already. I kind of want to focus on the other characters, so I kind of get why they did that approach.
I don't know. It was kind of sad in some ways, but what wasn't sad was Samuel Jackson. Now I am putting Glass in the hero category. Do you agree with this assessment? Because ultimately, again, this is an origin story, and I think he is actually a hero. Do we agree on that?
No, I disagree, man. The dude killed a bunch of people. He even calls himself a villain, and even says the villains are teaming up, quote unquote. So it's hard for me. Like I feel like the villains category is just kind of loaded because I mean, Beast and Elijah to me are just the villains straight up, and then you got Sarah Paulson's character kind of being this middle ground. But to me, she's a villain as well. But to me, the heroes are David, his son, Elijah's mother, Anna Taylor Joy, and that's pretty much it. The supporting cast.
Okay, so if we're going on that, I really like the supporting characters. I am not as much of a fan of Bruce Willis, and for those reasons, so I'm going to change this. My score is going to be a 5.
Wow, okay, that kind of hurt me, but I'm going with a 7 just because I don't know, man. I got so much satisfaction seeing David Dunn and his son all these years later the way that their relationship has been built up over the years, and seeing, Elijah's mother having all that dialogue at the end, but having like actually, having dialogue that matters, and seeing everything play out at the end, and then those three having that moment at the end of the movie, I thought was pretty cool. So, seeing the reaction of the video and the viral video being released, so I was digging it, man, and I was still hoping for Haley Joel Osment to pop out at the end, but again, that would have been too distracting.
Anna Taylor-Joy is very good in this movie, and it's unfortunate that because of everything going on that she couldn't have a bigger role. But I think if you see her in this movie, you watch her in Split, you even see her in a movie like Emma, it's incredibly obvious that she's going to be a major star. And I am very dubious of doing a Furiosa sequel, as has been rumored. If doing a Furiosa movie with Charlize Theron just seems kind of pointless, but Anna Taylor Joy definitely gives me pause. I think she is going to be a star. And Brian, maybe someday we will see her performance in New Mutants, which I'm not convinced actually exists, but maybe someday we'll see it.
Listen, I've had some strange predictions kind of coming true lately. I predicted the Lakers would not make the finals. I don't think that's going to happen now, technically. I predicted the XFL would not have a full season. That's technically not happening anymore either. I also kind of predicted some other things, and also predicted that this movie would not be released and go straight to streamer. And then weeks before it was released, all this shit happened. So what does that tell you? I think it's going straight to streamer, like I said.
It tells me that this is all your fault, that you are the reason that we are all in our homes isolated and having to quarantine. So if anybody would like to blame someone, please direct your tweets to, again, at Brian DeBrain. This is all your fault, man.
I kind of accepted it, but I'm not a LeBron fan, so I even turned on the Lakers as a Laker fan myself. So what does that tell you? The world is in chaos.
That is putting it mildly. All right, let's talk about the villains. I think Samuel L. Jackson is great. We don't really see him talk for much of the first half of the movie, and all I could say is, I'm not going to say which movie because I don't want to spoil it. But this is now this is the first of two consecutive years where we've had a surprise throat slit, and I think this one was even better than the one that I'm referring to, Brian. I think you know what movie I'm referring to. I think this one is even better just because you are waiting for Mr. Glass to awake from his stupor and actually do something. And you kind of get that scene between him and the Beast, but then you get this moment where this nurse is sitting in front of him, and he does it so quick that you barely even notice it, and it's so well done. And if you are going to give overwritten exposition to someone, then Samuel Jackson is the person that you want delivering that exposition, and he does it marvelously. I think there are some parts of the plot that don't necessarily work, especially that third act, but Samuel Jackson and the way that Mr. Glass is written, it's pretty great. You get to see him in rare form.
Oh man, the first time you watch this and like not knowing much about going into it in the first watch, that build up to like, because there's this tension, like does he know what's going on? Is he really taking his pills? There's this really like cat and mouse game going on the first half of the movie, and it's really illustrated when the guard is like teasing him, and then he drops the flashlight, and all of a sudden there's this kind of sudden gasp the first time I watched it, because I was like, his legs are gonna get broken, and then he catches it. I was like, oh, he's messing with us. He's messing with the audience. I like that. And then it kind of builds up to that tension, and then finally the big reveal. Like I think it's like after the first hour of the movie, it's like that for like 30 minutes straight. You just kind of see Elijah and his plan and everything is building up in his plan. So I thought it was a great build up to revealing that he's still very conscious and he's still very aware and he's still been playing him all these years. And his mom's even kind of encouraging him to, which is kind of bad, but whatever. She loves her son no matter what, I guess, even after all those murders. So, but yeah, he did a stellar job, I think, over the years. I think, God, he's 70 years old, man, is still going, but I feel like his performances keep getting slightly better, more refined with age, and he did a hell of a job, man. And then the way he would just kind of like, he's supposed to pretend to like he's kind of out of it and drugged out, right? So he's just winking at random times when the light flashes on his eyes, you know what I mean? Little things like that kind of improve the performance, that kind of fool you into thinking that he's still drugged out.
Yeah, and I feel the same way about Samuel Jackson as I do James McAvoy. And McAvoy had a very interesting 2019 in retrospect. He is in a lot of critically slammed movies, and if you can believe it, this is probably the movie that got slammed the least because there were a lot of heavy critiques of It Chapter 2 as well as Dark Phoenix. So James McAvoy, but he may have been even in the reviews that did not like this movie. They went out of their way to talk about James McAvoy's performance, and I think it's in a lot of ways it is a continuation of Split. I think he was undoubtedly the best part of that movie from a performance standpoint, bringing humanity to a character that could easily just be considered kind of monstrous. And I think he does the exact same thing here. And in fact, we almost see him as a protagonist in some cases by the end of this movie. And just the sympathy that builds and that relationship, the almost Bruce and the almost Hulk and his girlfriend's relationship. It felt very similar to that in some cases with Anna Taylor-Joy. And yeah, I have a ton of respect for what James McAvoy was able to do. And even though he's technically a villain by our categorization, I think that he was also very, very good. And there are a lot of scenes that I think probably could not have worked under different circumstances, and he makes them work.
I think what really his perform I mean what really helps his performance and really elevates his performance is the physicality he approaches to the role, and like how physical he has to be at certain personalities, right? Like for him to go from Hedwig to the Beast, it's he has got to take the shirt off and then he's got to start bulking up. He's got to go through this process, and you can see him do the physical process in front of you, almost like that Christopher Reeves thing when he's like, turning in from Clark Kent to Superman. It's almost like he's doing the same kind of physical kind of acting, and it's just really, jaw dropping to watch at times when they're flashing the lights and he's changing from character to character. I mean, they were really flashing lights and stuff, so that must have been A, really distracting, and then B, to kind of switch personalities once that light switches. It's like, you got to be, like, how many takes did that take? You know what I mean? Like, to get it right and then get all the timing right for the right personalities and everything like that, and to execute the nuances of each personality. I mean, my God, like the stuff with the needle and then him almost catching the guard off guard. You know what I mean? That was great stuff. I mean, he just knocked it out, man. I felt like even in Split, like even though it came out earlier in the year, and I don't know if Blumhouse and Universal even had the money put aside for like some kind of campaign, but they could have easily campaigned just for his performance to get, and especially in this one, Best Supporting Actor. I thought, considering the category this year and who was nominated for Best Supporting Actor, I thought McAvoy probably did a better job than Al Pacino, and he got nominated for Irishman. So, I thought that his performance was just overlooked.
Horror movies never get the credit that they deserve, for better and for worse, because if anybody was going to get nominated for a horror movie in 2019, it should have been Lupita Nyong'o for Us. And as much as I like James McAvoy in this movie, the fact that Lupita Nyong'o did not get a nomination, I mean, that is absurd to me. I mean, her performance is easily one of the five best of the year, and the fact that, I think it's a lack of respect for that format, for the genre. Horror never gets and will never get the credit that it deserves, and it sucks.
Yeah, I get what you're saying too, and I know people are going to be screaming out loud "Silence of the Lambs," but that kind of teeters that line between crime drama and horror, but they play more to the crime drama, and that's probably why it won. But then again, I'm just saying, like, Blumhouse, I don't know, man. Sometimes I think you just got to kind of go for it, man. I think they could have go for it with James McAvoy last year, but they didn't. So that's a shame. And I thought he did a hell of a job again. And it makes me want to have a sequel, but he's dead. But maybe it's best off that he leaves it at these two movies and that's it. Because, man, I mean, he was borderline Wolverine almost.
Which is fascinating given what other movies he was in. Let's talk about Sarah Paulson, who she plays the gaslighting therapist, Dr. Ellie Staple, with ulterior motives as she spends the entire movie trying to convince the various powered people that they are not, in fact, superpowered, and she is a part of a major organization trying to hide the fact that they exist, and apparently their goal in life is they have spent 10,000 years basically saying that superheroes do not exist and trying to hide that fact. So I think that's something that this is a movie that tries to raise this issue, and I'm ultimately not sure how successful they are at it, because there are times when I really appreciate the fact that they're trying to expand kind of the horizons of this world. But whenever you do an organization like this, unless you have it, unless kind of the devils are in the details, unless you have those really solid details, it's going to be really hard for people to get engaged with it. And I think this is definitely one of the weakest parts of the movie. I think Sarah Paulson is tremendous, but I think unfortunately the rest of the movie does not function nearly as well because of this all-knowing organization. And I think that is part of where my frustration lies. I think the movie is best when it is centering kind of on the three of them, but then ultimately revealing this to be an origin story is interesting in theory, and I even appreciate kind of what they're doing. But the organization itself, the fact that we haven't even had a sniff of this organization, unless I've totally missed something in both Unbreakable and Split. This is an organization that we are just learning about in this movie, and it kind of feels like they're trying to cheat and get away with something.
Yeah, I totally get what you're saying, and I have that same feeling because it reminded me of like Heroes and then Agents of Shield. It's like these secret organizations that try to keep things in check, and we get that. We've seen it before. Maybe he just kind of ran out of ideas and didn't know how to finish his movie and came up with this organization thing. But I think he had some kind of idea in mind of that, where it's like this mass conspiracy to cover everything up. Because again, like people love conspiracies, man. They love to buy into them no matter what, despite how much reason, despite that, or despite the fact. You know what I mean? So people just love to dig into that shit. So it's, I guess, it's part of that. I don't know, American, I don't know, psyche, something about that where we just love to dig into conspiracy theories, man. And this, I guess, this is one of them. Covering up the fact that there's superheroes in real life. So. Again, Sarah Paulson, tremendous stuff. So for my overall, my villain, because we're kind of teetering into the story stuff. So overall, I'm going with an 8 on the villains, despite the secret organization stuff, and that's not, that doesn't really affect the performance of Sarah Paulson. So I thought she was tremendous in doing that whole. I forget the nurse from, like I mentioned, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, but it's definitely got that feel to it. The gaslighting thing. Again, she fooled me halfway through because I was thinking, like, God, do they really don't have superpowers? And that's the big twist. And then it was just a giant conspiracy theory at the end. So for me, I'm going with an 8 solid. I thought just everyone's performance on the villain side was just tremendous. Just a trio of great performances.
So I'm not going to go quite as high as you. I'm giving this a 7. I think the performances are great. I think, again, the first 90 minutes are pretty great. I think this conspiracy thing is the reason that I can't really give this a Pantheon level score, but I think when you put it all together, I think there's more than enough to say that this was probably one of the better villains that you will ever see in one of these superhero movies, especially all the pathos and all the development, the work that they put into investing people into both Glass and the Beast. Now let's talk about the story, which I think is easily the weakest aspect of this movie. I think the David Dunn parts, I think the first couple scenes are fine, but I think the third act, I think this third act is kind of a disaster. A bigger budget is clearly needed. I think the way that all three characters die, I think when we talked about this last year, I think I was most critical about David Dunn's death and the fact that they kind of drowned him in a puddle and he went out like a punk. And it's bad, but I also think just the way even Glass dies is kind of weak. The way that Kevin slash the Beast is killed, the plot involving Staple and the all-knowing Force, I think it feels very convoluted. Glass's plan is quite elaborate, and I think it's kind of absurd. I do like the idea of the last couple minutes as the world sees that superpower people do in fact exist, and this is going to be kind of a new reality for this world. Whether it gets explored or not is, I would seriously doubt it at this point. But for me, I think that the story is very much a mixed bag, and I'm not sure that it comes together as well as it could have.
Yeah, seeing David, drown in that puddle was like a gut punch the first time. I got really like, wow, I didn't expect that. But I think that kind of ties into this anti superhero thing that it's got going for it. Like it's very much, setting up these things that are not going to happen. There's no giant explosion at the top of a building. There's no giant blue beam in the sky that pisses Jerome off. There's not any of that stuff. You know what I mean? And it was alluding that it was going to happen, something like that, but it didn't. And notice it said a modern Marvel, quote unquote. You know what I mean? I thought that was like a nice little wink to Marvel on that magazine cover. But it kind of subverts your expectations, and I get that, and it's not that kind of movie, so I kind of expected something like that, because I was like, wow, they're really going to go all out at the end. But then they fooled me, you know what I mean? But again, it's like, it does suck, and the way that the Beast kind of goes out, it was kind of satisfying, considering that I thought Dunn should have killed him, but again, the whole message of it all was this giant conspiracy was going to kill him in the end anyway, to keep that balance of power in check is what they want, so they pulled it off at the end, and pretty much the ending is the bad guys win, but at the end the world, knows anyway, so it's kind of like, well, the whole overall purpose as a failure. So I guess that was the message, but technically the bad guys do win at the end, but the secret organization thing, that's where it kind of gets thrown in the loop, because I keep thinking, like, 10,000 years, who are these random people? Is this bartender at the restaurant a part of it, because he seems to be really into the whole bartending role thing? A lot of weird questions, you know what I mean? So, and then she says, do I have my permission to go to the next city? So there's obviously other people on their radar. So, I mean, obviously they want to expand. If he wanted to, he could expand the universe, but we can talk about that later in the burning questions. But, yeah, I think it's probably done for now, but you never know. But just something about that organization thing that kind of threw everything out of whack a little bit. And I guess kind of see what you're saying, almost off the rails, but not totally off the rails for me. But I'm gonna go with a 6 on the story end. It's a little too inside baseball, and I think on the first two times I watched it in theaters I was digging it, but the third time around it's like, okay, a casual audience is not gonna really understand these comic book terms. That's very Vince Russo WCW 2000-ish for your inside wrestling fans there. So yeah, it just kind of felt like that, and I was kind of realizing that I don't think a casual audience would understand. So maybe that there was kind of a disconnect there. So that kind of, hinders the story a little bit. That's why I went with a 6.
I think the other issue that I am seeing is the fact that there is so much exposition and there is so much of an attempt to explain what is going on, the idea of the crossover, the idea of the origin, even talking about some of the comic book history. They're clearly going for something, and they're clearly M. Night Shyamalan clearly wants his audience to understand what is going on by having these scenes of exposition. And basically, it seems like the way it comes across to me is that somebody who is not familiar with comic book stories should be able to watch this and be able to understand everything that's going on. And I feel like that there are times when he explains things so much that it becomes very difficult for people to still keep up with what's going on. So for me, because of the fact that there's so much telling and not showing, the third act being what it is, I'm giving the story score a 5. And I think it's really unfortunate because I think the way that this movie was going, there was a lot of, and we're going to talk about this is in the technical parts. I love the use of colors to represent the various characters. I think that works out really well because I don't think it's beating you over the head. I think it's really solid, just the way that these characters are represented. I love the way that the visuals match up with the in-camera effects. I love the way that certain close-ups are done. I like the soundtrack that it hints both back to Unbreakable and Split, the way that they use the string instruments during certain points and the way that they use kind of the more epic score at other points. I love the way that they mixed everything up, and I love the set design as well. I love the way that the hospital looks and the way that they were able to portray these things and make this hospital such an important part of the movie to where it felt like it was a real place and not just a set somewhere in downtown Atlanta like some of the Marvel sets can sometimes feel. So I really appreciated what they did from a technical standpoint, and it's unfortunate, again, that the third act just does not come across as well. I'm giving this an 8 or a 9, but as it is, I'm giving the technical score a 7.
I'll go with an 8 because I just felt like they did the color thing right, because especially when the kid or David Dunn's kid is in the comic book store, and then you see the villain side has the purple lighting and the hero side has the green lighting. It was just, maybe it was hitting you over the head a little too much, but he just does these things really, really well, and that's what I like from the original Sixth Sense with the hints of the red color. He just does that shit really well. And then you mentioned the high strings that just really brought out the tension. Yeah, I love the look of this movie, and I love that scene where it's like you reveal that Mr. Glass killed Kevin's parent or Kevin's dad on the train, right? And then they just transition from that scene they shot for, or they probably shot it a couple of years ago, and then transition to the old footage with the camera angle and just kind of do it in one thing where they just match the camera angle or on the motion of the tracking shot, and then it matches up with the shot from Unbreakable. So I thought that was just incredibly done, you know what I mean? And it just felt like the same kind of motion. And then using the old stock footage, that deleted scenes from Unbreakable, I thought that was great too. So I'm gonna give it an 8, man, because I really dug the way that he put this movie together visually and stylistically.
I can certainly understand why somebody would be willing to give this an 8, but I think for me it just comes up a little bit short. And again, the one thing I will say, Brian, again, I think there are some people who really dislike this movie, really hate this movie, and I feel like the two of us being on give this kind of a more positive spin. Let's talk about the legacy. I think this is a movie that made a very good amount of money, especially considering the budget. I think it's going to be overshadowed by the other superhero movies. I'm hopeful that it becomes a cult classic at some point. I think it's going to be remembered as the continuation of M. Night Shyamalan's comeback, as well as the performances of both James McAvoy and Samuel L. Jackson. But unfortunately, because of the fact that it's going to kind of be overshadowed by so many of these other movies and the unfortunate critical response, I'm giving this a little bit of a low score of a 6.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with a 6 as well. I think over time that you're right, it could be a cult classic, and that the score could probably go from a 7 to possibly even an 8, but years from now. But right now, for me, it's a 6. Again, like if this was like super critically successful, and then like the box office was even more successful, then yeah, it'd be a 7 right now. But it did good money, solid money, mixed critical response. But I think his the diehards. I went with a friend who didn't even see Split. Or actually, no, I did see Split with him because I think what happened was I read about the spoiler in Split, and I went and saw it with him because I was like, you got to watch this. Like, it'll be something from like a big twist at the end from our childhood. And he was like, what, M Night Shyamalan? Because we were big M Night Shyamalan fans, and then once the twist happens, he was like, oh my God, it's David Dunn. And then we went and saw and we saw it together again for Break or for Glass. So I just felt like it had this kind of built-in audience from that audience from the original group of core M Night Shyamalan fans before it kind of went off the rails. You know what I mean? Because he had that following, man. He had like Sixth Sense made a lot of money, Signs made a lot of money. He had a big following, so I felt like some of that audience came back and kind of supported him here. So
Absolutely. And so my total score is a 30, and yours is?
35, like I said, I really enjoyed this even the third time around, and I know that's borderline, pantheon level, and I know some people are going to be like, what are you talking about? But again, man, if you buy into the first two, or especially if you buy in to Unbreakable, I think that you're just kind of hooked and just enjoy that full circle closure. So that's what happened with us.
I really enjoy the fact that this movie is at least trying to do some different things. I don't think that is completely successful at those things, but I think we have to appreciate and we have to give different kinds of superhero movies the opportunity to be successful. And I feel the same way about a movie that we talked about pretty recently in Birds of Prey. I like the fact that Birds of Prey was very different in the way that it executed different things. And that's why I'm very, very excited to see New Mutants, because New Mutants, I think similarly to Glass, is kind of trying to be a horror movie for superheroes. And I think we've even gotten some horror flashes in movies like Aquaman and Shazam as well. So I do like the mixing of genres, and I'm hopeful that that's something that we can continue to see, that we can see these different movies in the way that they come across, that it's not just Marvel, it's not just the way of Marvel doing things, but that we can ultimately see different kinds of superhero movies. And that's one of the reasons that I'm glad that Glass was still successful despite some of the critical lambasting that was going on.
Yeah, I get you, man, and I love the fact that it's a $20 million budget. I just I mean, people think that, a superhero movie requires 100 million or more, maybe even 150 now. You know what I mean? So I'm just glad that you can scale it down, put it on the big screen, and have it be profitable. Because I think now, especially now, with the whole downturn of the economy and Hollywood flipping on its ear, something like this probably would have gone to a streamer in 2020, even just a year beforehand. You know what I mean? So they got lucky that they released this at the right time and made that money. Because I mean, look at the budget, man, and the way that movies need to be a surefire hit now, especially coming back after this thing with the pandemic. So I think they got lucky to release this at the right time, man, because this seems like something that would have been pushed back and like just put on a streamer. You know what I mean?
We'll see what happens as things start to come back and whether you are proven to be right. Let's get to the burning questions. Why did this movie get savaged in the critical response?
It seems like M. Night Shyamalan has this wave where it's like he rides that wave pretty high and then crashes pretty hard with some of his other movies. And so he rode the wave high again, but then the critics wanted to kind of level him out, I guess. That's what it seems like, because I don't know what critics were expecting, man, because given the size and scope of that universe, it's like, what do you want? Like a full out, superhero fighting throughout the whole movie and just do this cliche of what a Marvel movie is, but with the glass characters, you know what I mean? Like I don't know. It's totally what I expected from him and the kind of movie that I was expecting that it should be. You know what I mean? It should be scaled down in small scale, and I just don't know what critics were expecting, but I just feel like they like to shit on Shyamalan when he's having a high point, and then when he's at his low point, kind of bring him up again to kind of throw him back in the spotlight. It's weird. It's very weird.
I definitely feel like there are critics that have it out for Shyamalan no matter what, and I think that that may have colored some of the response. And I think the fact that Glass wasn't totally what people were expecting, I think that may have also had an effect on the way that people perceive this movie. And I can't ignore the fact that I think people are also not fans of Bruce Willis at this point, and that naturally leads us into question number two. How much better is this movie if Bruce Willis' character is developed?
Uh, Way a lot better, but like I said, it's. I mean, what can you tell even more? I mean, it's in the first 20 minutes they pretty much told you, I think, as much as they could. Like his wife's dead. He's been doing this for 17 years. He's obviously old and gray now and tired, and he's pushing himself. And I mean, that's you can do a little more with that, I guess, and do a little more, show him a little more on the ground and him beating people up more and kind of suffering mentally a little bit. But then again, the 2 hours for the runtime, I thought the pacing was just right. Anything longer, I think, would have been too excessive. So it is what it is. I kind of accepted it. It would have been nice if we got a little more of it, but we just didn't have time for it.
We certainly did not, and I don't know. I think part of it may ultimately just be kind of a Bruce Willis problem and not necessarily a problem with the character development. But let's get to question number three. On the implausibility scale of 1 to 10, how implausible is Glass's plan, with 1 being not plausible, with 1 being plausible and 10 being completely implausible?
I'll go with a 7, because you're relying on recording security camera footage and streaming it live on a server. There's all these things that can go wrong with streaming video. We've experienced that. I mean, everyone's had problems losing files, so that one-time chance of you streaming live security cam footage to a hard drive and not having it fuck up, that within itself sounds very risky. So, yeah, 7 in the implausibility scale. And if you're going with the whole thing about him going to the top of the Osaka Tower or whatever, I think his plan was never even to get there in the first place. So, it's a swerve on a swerve.
What if it was the Nakatomi Tower?
You see, that's what I was thinking too, and I was kind of thinking about that, but I was like, nah, that might be too racist. I don't know, but goddamn, I couldn't help but think of Tower and Bruce Willis and Die Hard.
I mean, it's natural. I mean, that's the movie where Bruce Willis literally made a name for himself and became a giant movie star, so I think it's totally understandable. Brian, this is a very good question. Will we ever see Anna Taylor-Joy in another superhero movie in theaters?
Yes, but like I said, New Mutants, I can almost guarantee at this point that my bet from 2 years ago is going to happen, that it will go to a streamer, probably on Hulu at this point, but I don't know. I see her as a different MCU character. Like, just don't have any continuity with New Mutants. Let that be a one standalone. Go from there. I mean, she could be Emma Frost maybe, like she's got the hair for it. But yeah, I think she can do some X-Men kind of character. She's already doing the New Mutant stuff, but just do a new mutant character because she's got the acting chops for it. She's got the star power, I think, the potential star power, kind of built around her, and yeah, something around the X-Men kind of level.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm very curious to know where she is going to go in her career because she's obviously going to be someone that has a really big career, and the fact that she's again being considered for Furiosa, and some of the critical acclaim that she has gotten for being in the movie Emma, I think it's really starting to add up for her career, and I do have a feeling that she is going to be in a superhero movie at some point. I don't think that you. I do not think that New Mutants is going to get released in theaters. It would not surprise me if in the next month or so there is a release of this movie, perhaps on digital, maybe not even on Hulu, but that Disney does what some other studios have tried to do and see what happens when they put a movie just straight video on demand, as other studios have done. Should this movie get a sequel? Because I am fairly convinced that this is a good place to end things, and that no matter what M. Night Shyamalan tries to do, that either he's not going to have the budget for it, or he really does not have the ambition to tell these kinds of stories. So I would almost just say to leave it as is and let our imaginations run wild.
Yeah, I'll say no more sequel. Possibly 10 years from now, do like a mini series, kind of come back and kind of revisit the world. Because, at some point during the movie, I was thinking that Anna Taylor Joy had some kind of superpower, and that Sarah Paulson was kind of alluding to that. And like something about like you have this thing about bringing out the love in people or whatever, just something strange like that she threw out that line. So she could have superpowers and they can come back 10 years later and she can discover that she had powers all this time or blah blah blah. They could do something like that, but for the movie universe, I think it's done. The three movies, the unexpected sequel thing, and the whole sparking the interest again and making it into trilogy, it's done. Leave it at that, and then do a miniseries 10 years from now, maybe like Apple streaming or something.
Well, it's funny you say that because M. Night Shyamalan does have a series on Apple TV that he was an executive producer for, and he directed the first couple episodes.
That's why I mention it, because he's building that relationship. He knows what he's doing. You combine Blumhouse maybe with Apple, and you see what we can get 10 years from now.
We'll see. Apple might be buying Disney at some point after this pandemic is over. Apple might be. That is one of the rumors that's going around.
Okay, even more craziness in 2020. So we're just throwing that out there, I guess.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. All right, so Brian, we are going to be staying in the city of Philadelphia as the home of ECW, the home of Roman Reigns' legendary Royal Rumble victories. Next week we will be reviewing Shazam. I'm very excited to revisit this movie because I know that we both liked this a lot when we talked about it last year, and we're going to be talking about a Christmas movie in April again.
Yes, and we'll be talking about Dogma again, because you know that one scene I'm talking about, where it just feels like idolaters are just all over that room, right?
Yes, I agree with you. It definitely gives off those vibes, and we're going to talk about a lot of different things. As I think in the last year, our perspectives on the DCU might have changed even more. So that is what you have to look forward to next week. For Brian, my name is Jerome. Thank you so much for listening. We will talk to you next week.
First name Mister, last name Ass, aka the one Billy Gunn.